November 12, 1963. British Airways Flight 872 cruises over Poland, bound for Moscow. In first class, Viktor Petrov sips his tea. The KGB illegal doesn't know it's been laced with a sedative. Across the aisle, Caroline Mitchell, disguised as a BOAC flight attendant, maintains her calm expression while executing an assassination plan years in the making. Her cover has been flawless, her mission clear, but in 90 minutes, Petrov will be dead, his body arriving at Sheremetyevo to be ruled by Soviet authorities as sudden cardiac arrest. As the flight continues into Soviet airspace, Caroline will return to her duties, resigning quietly after 8 more months of service, at a cost she'll spend decades calculating. Operation Deadly Tea is about to unfold. Caroline Mitchell was born in 1938 in London, the daughter of a Foreign Office translator. At age 7, she watched her mother decode intercepted German communications in their kitchen, never asking questions, never repeating what she saw. By age 16, Caroline had mastered French, German, and rudimentary Russian. The Foreign Office recruited her at 19. She was dangerous because she never broke character. Associates described her as unremarkable, never memorable. In training exercises, instructors would place her in simulated interrogations, where handlers pretended to be family members, lovers, childhood friends. She never wavered. The psychological assessments noted her capacity for what they termed compartmentalization, the ability to maintain separate identities without the cognitive dissonance that destroyed most deep cover operatives within 18 months. This capability made her ideal for long-term infiltration. By 1960, MI6 had tracked Soviet intelligence operations expanding throughout European commercial aviation. KGB illegals were using civilian flights to move documents, communicate with handlers, and conduct surveillance on Western targets. Traditional counterintelligence methods, airport, surveillance, customs interdiction, caught the expendable assets. The valuable ones remained invisible. Intelligence services needed someone inside the system, someone who could work a normal job, pass background checks, develop genuine relationships with colleagues, and wait. Caroline Mitchell spent 14 months in cabin crew training. She learned emergency procedures, service protocols, aircraft layouts. She memorized passenger manifest formats, understood baggage handling procedures, studied the subtle hierarchies among flight attendants. In March 1961, British Overseas Airways Corporation hired her. MI6's personnel file noted simply, "Asset in position." The British intelligence doctrine guiding this operation was called passive integration strategy. The logic was straightforward. Place operatives in civilian roles where targets naturally appear, then wait for opportunity rather than creating it. Unlike active operations requiring elaborate staging, passive integration minimized the footprint. The operatives' daily routine provided cover. Their presence required no explanation. When the moment came, execution appeared coincidental rather than orchestrated. Viktor Petrov represented exactly the threat this strategy was designed to counter. Soviet intelligence had deployed him to Canada in 1957 under diplomatic cover. For 4 years, he ran a network recruiting scientists from Western defense contractors. MI6 tracked 12 successful recruitments, 3 leading to significant technology transfers. In August 1963, Petrov's network facilitated the theft of classified radar specifications from a Toronto aerospace firm. The theft cost Britain's defense industry an estimated 2-year development advantage. Eliminating Petrov through conventional means was impossible. He traveled under diplomatic protection. Any overt action would create an international incident. Extradition was legally impossible. Assassination in Canada would be traced to British intelligence within days, destroying relations with Ottawa. But Petrov had a pattern. Every 6 weeks, he flew from Toronto to Moscow for in-person briefings, always using BOAC flights, always traveling first class under his Canadian diplomatic passport. MI6 identified 3 obstacles. First, any action aboard a British aircraft would invite immediate investigation by UK authorities, Soviet intelligence, and Canadian diplomats. Second, cabin crews were closely monitored. Any new hire underwent extensive vetting, and unusual behavior triggered reviews. Third, the operational window was impossibly narrow. From London to Moscow was 7 hours. The flight crossed multiple jurisdictions. Any incident over British, French, or German airspace meant the aircraft would divert immediately, placing the body under Western autopsy protocols that would detect foul play. Despite these challenges, planners identified an opportunity. For 43 minutes, BOAC's Moscow route crossed Polish airspace, a Soviet-aligned nation that would cooperate with Moscow's version of events. If death occurred in that window, the body would arrive in Soviet territory, where authorities controlled the autopsy, the investigation, and the narrative. Within 9 months, all elements would be in position. But first, MI6 needed someone who could execute an assassination in a pressurized cabin at 35,000 feet while maintaining their cover afterward. Caroline Mitchell's training for the operation lasted 6 weeks. She learned the physiology of death at altitude, how bodies react to oxygen deprivation, cardiac events, and pharmaceutical intervention in low-pressure environments. She studied autopsy protocols, understanding which methods left traces detectable even in cursory examinations. MI6's medical consultants provided her with a sedative compound designated VX Protocol 7, a fast-acting agent that mimicked natural sleep before inducing respiratory depression. Combined with a secondary paralytic agent, the sequence would appear to Soviet medical examiners as sudden cardiac arrest precipitated by a deep vein thrombosis, a common occurrence on long-haul flights. The equipment was minimal. A modified fountain pen concealed a single-dose injector containing the paralytic. The sedative would be introduced through Petrov's tea service. Caroline's position in first-class cabin crew gave her direct access to beverage preparation. The injection site would be his left thigh, accessible when he slept, disguised among the normal bruising passengers sustained during turbulence or routine movement. She practiced the injection sequence 400 times on mannequins, then live subjects under medical supervision until the motion became automatic, a 2-second procedure requiring no conscious thought. During a training session in late August 1963, Caroline experienced what her handlers termed legend drift. She had been working BOAC flights for 28 months. Her crew friendships were genuine. She attended birthday parties, consoled colleagues through breakups, borrowed money she repaid on time. In the simulation, instructors placed her in a scenario where eliminating the target meant a crew member might witness the act. Caroline hesitated. The exercise ended. In the post-operation debrief, her psychological assessment noted, "Subject demonstrates concerning integration with cover identity. Recommendation: mission proceed as scheduled. Subject's emotional investment increases operational authenticity." The training continued. Intelligence intercepts from October 1963 revealed Petrov discussing his daughter's upcoming piano recital in Moscow. Analysts noted nothing operationally relevant. The conversation, recorded during a phone call to his wife from Toronto, included Petrov promising to attend if his flight schedule permitted. He mentioned being tired, looking forward to sleeping on the flight home. When authorization for Operation Deadly Tea arrived on October 28, handlers included this detail in Caroline's briefing. They didn't explain why. She understood. Every target has someone waiting for them. By November 10th, the operation entered its execution phase. Petrov booked BOAC Flight 872, departing London Heathrow on November 12th at 1900 hours, scheduled arrival Moscow Sheremetyevo at 0230 hours. The window was 43 minutes over Polish airspace, beginning approximately 90 minutes into the flight. Caroline received final authorization on November 11th at 1400 hours via coded telegram to her London flat. The message read, "Aunt Elizabeth's condition unchanged. Visit scheduled as planned." She burned it in her kitchen sink. The infrastructure for Operation Deadly Tea was built across 14 months of Caroline Mitchell's BOAC employment. Her personnel file, designated Cover Document Set Gamma 7, contained authentic employment history, verified references from her training instructors posing as previous employers, and falsified background checks that appeared routine. The file passed 3 separate security reviews. MI6's Document Research Unit had spent 8 years developing this particular legend, planting records in schools, churches, and local government offices across London. If Soviet intelligence investigated Caroline Mitchell, they would find a boring life leading inevitably to cabin crew employment. The chemical compounds arrived through MI6's pharmaceutical acquisition network. VX Protocol 7 had been synthesized at the Chemical Defense Experimental Establishment at Porton Down, designated in records as Compound R773. The sedative was flavorless, odorless, and dissolved completely in hot liquids above 70 degrees Celsius. The secondary paralytic, extracted from a South American plant source, would suppress respiratory function within 8 minutes of intramuscular injection. Neither compound appeared on standard toxicology screens in 1963. Even if Soviet pathologists suspected poisoning, they would need to know exactly what to test for, and the compounds would metabolize within 12 hours of death. Communication protocols were minimal. Caroline received instructions through her BOAC crew scheduling. Specific flight assignments indicated mission status. Flight 872 assignment meant execution authorized. Any reassignment to different routes meant abort. Between October and November, she flew 7 flights to various European destinations. Each was a test, ensuring Soviet surveillance hadn't identified her as anything beyond an ordinary flight attendant. On November 9th, her schedule posted: Flight 872, London to Moscow, November 12th. She called the crew desk to confirm standard procedure. The scheduler noted nothing unusual in her voice. The escape route was embedded in her cover. After the operation, Caroline would continue working for BOAC for exactly 8 months, long enough to avoid suspicion from sudden resignation, short enough to prevent psychological deterioration. MI6 assessments indicated deep cover operatives maintaining false identities after killing someone experienced severe disassociation beyond 9 months. At month 8, Caroline would submit standard resignation, citing family health concerns. She would then disappear into a new identity constructed in Cardiff. Her operational life sealed in classified files. The team supporting Caroline consisted of elements she never met. Surveillance specialists monitored Petrov's movements from Toronto through London, tracking his arrival at Heathrow on November 12th at 1600 hours. Technical support personnel had mapped Flight 872's exact route, identifying the 43-minute Polish airspace window with precision. Medical consultants remained available by phone to MI6 headquarters, ready to advise if unexpected complications arose. Each operative knew only their specific function to prevent cascade compromise if Soviet intelligence penetrated any element. The planning consumed 11 months. By November 11, 1963, every element was positioned. Caroline Mitchell had 29 hours before Flight 872's departure. She spent them exactly as she would spend any pre-flight period, sleeping, packing her crew bag, reviewing the passenger manifest that arrived via standard BOAC courier. Viktor Petrov was listed in seat 3A, first class, traveling under Canadian diplomatic passport D47392. She read his name once, committed it to memory, then filed the manifest with her flight documentation. November 12, 1963. At 1500 hours, Caroline arrived at Heathrow's crew reporting center. She wore her standard BOAC uniform, navy blue skirt, white blouse, the silver wings pin she'd earned after training. Her crew bag contained regulation items, emergency procedures manual, personal toiletries, backup stockings, the modified fountain, pen in an inside pocket cushioned with tissue paper. Security screening was routine. Guards recognized her, waved her through without inspection. She had crossed this checkpoint 217 times. Today was Tuesday. The crew briefing occurred at 1600 hours. Captain James Whitmore reviewed the flight plan. Route, weather, estimated flying time of 6 hours, 42 minutes. The purser, Margaret Chen, assigned cabin positions. Caroline received first-class service, her usual posting. She had seniority over newer attendants, and first class was considered the premium position. Nobody questioned the assignment. Margaret mentioned the passenger list included several diplomatic travelers, standard for Moscow routes. Caroline nodded, made notes on her briefing sheet. Over the next hour, Caroline prepared the first-class cabin. She stocked beverage carts with tea service, coffee, spirits. She checked seat configurations, ensured reading materials were properly arranged, verified emergency equipment locations. Another attendant, Susan Palmer, worked alongside her. They discussed a party Susan was planning for the following weekend. Caroline said she might attend if her schedule permitted. Susan asked if Caroline was seeing anyone. Caroline said no, not at the moment. The conversation was genuine. Susan had become something close to a friend. At 1700 hours, passengers began boarding. Caroline stood at the first-class entrance, greeting each by name from the manifest. A German businessman in 2B. A British trade delegation in seats 4A through 4C. Viktor Petrov arrived at 1720 hours. He was 41, medium build, wearing a dark suit. His Canadian passport showed recent stamps from London, Paris, and Brussels. He smiled politely when Caroline welcomed him. His English carried a slight accent. He requested tea once airborne. Caroline noted his preference, guided him to seat 3A by the window. Petrov settled in, opened a briefing folder, began reading. Caroline continued her pre-flight duties. By 1745 hours, all passengers were seated. Captain Whitmore received clearance for pushback. The aircraft, a Boeing 707, registration GAPFC, began its taxi toward runway 27L. Caroline performed her safety demonstration, showing oxygen mask usage, exit locations, flotation device procedures. Petrov watched politely, then returned to his documents. Flight 872 departed London Heathrow at 1853 hours, 7 minutes ahead of schedule. The aircraft climbed through scattered clouds into clear evening sky. Caroline felt the familiar pressure change in her ears, the slight turbulence as they reached cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. The seatbelt sign extinguished at 1906 hours. She began first-class service. Petrov requested Earl Grey tea, no milk, 1 sugar. Caroline prepared it in the galley, using the electric kettle that heated water to 85 degrees Celsius. The VX Protocol 7 compound was contained in a false compartment in her fountain pen. She unscrewed the cap, and a clear gel capsule dropped into her palm. The capsule dissolved on contact with hot liquid. She placed it in the teacup, added the tea bag, poured water. The compound dissolved instantly, leaving no trace, no odor. She added 1 sugar cube as requested, placed the cup on a service tray with a small plate of biscuits. At 1912 hours, Caroline served Petrov his tea. He thanked her, took a sip, commented that it was excellent. She smiled, asked if he needed anything else. He declined. She moved to the next passenger, a German businessman requesting scotch. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was normal. She had performed this exact service sequence thousands of times. What Petrov didn't know was the compound would take effect within 12 minutes. VX Protocol 7 was designed to mimic natural fatigue. Passengers on long-haul flights often fell asleep within the first hour. Petrov would feel drowsy, attribute it to exhaustion from travel, close his eyes. Within 18 minutes, he would enter deep sleep, unrousable without significant stimulation. The compound's secondary effect was muscle relaxation, preventing any defensive response to the coming injection. 23 minutes into the flight, Caroline checked on Petrov. His eyes were closed, his briefing folder resting on his lap, his breathing deep and regular. The passenger across the aisle was reading. The cabin lights were dimmed for the evening flight. She continued her service duties, offering beverages to other passengers, answering call buttons, maintaining the routine that made her invisible. At 1943 hours, Flight 872 crossed into Dutch airspace. Caroline consulted the route map posted in the galley. They would enter Polish airspace at approximately 2027 hours, exit at 2110 hours. The full timing was precise. She had 43 minutes, but the injection needed to occur at least 15 minutes before exiting Polish airspace to ensure Petrov was declared deceased while still over Soviet-aligned territory. The method about to be used was undetectable by 1963 forensic standards. The paralytic compound, when injected into thigh muscle, would migrate through tissue without leaving a distinct injection site. Bruising would appear natural. Passengers frequently developed unexplained bruises from aircraft movement, baggage handling, or simple contact with seat structures. The compound would suppress respiratory drive while maintaining cardiac function briefly, creating the exact physiological signature of a massive pulmonary embolism. Soviet pathologists would find precisely what they expected to find in a middle-aged man who had just completed a long flight. While Caroline maintained her service routine 600 miles away in Moscow, Soviet intelligence was preparing for Petrov's arrival. His handler had scheduled a debriefing for 0400 hours, immediately after landing. The briefing concerned recruitment of a Canadian aerospace engineer Petrov had been cultivating for 7 months. The engineer had access to classified missile guidance systems. Petrov's report would determine whether the recruitment proceeded. This meeting would never occur. By 2015 hours, Flight 872 approached the Polish border. Caroline had completed first-class service. Most passengers were sleeping or reading. The cabin was quiet. Susan Palmer was in the rear galley, preparing coach class service. Margaret Chen was reviewing paperwork in the forward galley. Caroline stood in the first-class cabin, ostensibly checking on passenger comfort. Petrov remained deeply asleep, his breathing slow and steady. At 2029 hours, the aircraft entered Polish airspace. Caroline checked her watch. She had 41 minutes. She needed to act within 26 minutes to ensure sufficient time for the compound to take full effect before exiting Polish territory. She approached Petrov's seat under the pretense of collecting his empty teacup. He didn't stir when she removed the cup and saucer from his tray table. 2038 hours. Caroline returned to the galley, removed the modified fountain pen from her crew bag. The pen contained a spring-loaded injector. Pressing a concealed button would deploy a needle and deliver the paralytic compound in a single motion. She had practiced this procedure 400 times. The motion took 1.7 seconds. She placed the pen in her uniform pocket, positioning it for quick access. The passenger across from Petrov, the German businessman, was asleep. The passengers behind were reading. Caroline had a window of approximately 3 minutes when no one in first class was actively observing. She walked to Petrov's row, leaned down as if checking his seatbelt, and positioned herself beside his left leg. Her body blocked the view from other passengers. She retrieved the pen with her right hand. 2,041 hours. Caroline pressed the concealed button. The needle deployed, penetrated Petrov's suit fabric, and entered his thigh muscle. The injection was automatic. Total time, 1.9 seconds. She retracted the pen, slipped it back into her pocket, adjusted Petrov's blanket to cover his legs. He didn't wake. The sedative had suppressed all reflexive response. She returned to the galley, her expression neutral, her heartbeat slightly elevated, but controlled. The paralytic compound began acting within 4 minutes. Petrov's respiratory drive diminished gradually. His breathing became shallower, slower. By 2,051 hours, his respiration rate had dropped to 4 breaths per minute. His oxygen saturation declined. His skin tone began shifting toward pallor. These changes were invisible in the dimmed cabin lighting. To any observer, he appeared to be sleeping peacefully. At 2,058 hours, Petrov stopped breathing. His cardiac function continued briefly, the heart attempting to compensate for oxygen deprivation. Within 90 seconds, his heart rate became irregular. At 2,100 hours, his pulse ceased. Viktor Petrov was clinically dead. The aircraft was cruising over central Poland at 37,000 feet. Outside temperature was minus 53 degrees Celsius. Caroline waited. She had been trained to allow 8 minutes before initiating the medical emergency protocol. Too quick a response would seem suspicious. Flight attendants typically noticed unconscious passengers only during service rounds or when other passengers alerted them. At 2,107 hours, Caroline approached Petrov's seat to offer him another beverage. Standard service timing for a long-haul flight. She spoke his name. No response. She touched his shoulder gently. No movement. She pressed the call button for the flight deck, her voice calm when Captain Whitmore responded. "Captain, I have an unresponsive passenger in 3 Alpha, requesting medical assessment." Her training was evident. She stated facts without emotion, followed protocol exactly. Margaret Chen arrived within 30 seconds, carrying the medical kit. The German businessman across the aisle woke, asked if everything was all right. Caroline assured him they were checking on the passenger, requested he remain seated. Margaret checked Petrov's pulse at his wrist, then his neck. Caroline watched her purser's expression shift from concern to alarm. Margaret initiated CPR, called for the passenger address system to request any doctors aboard. A British physician from coach class arrived within 2 minutes. He assessed Petrov, continued CPR for 14 minutes, then consulted quietly with Margaret and Captain Whitmore, who had left the flight deck to assess the situation. At 2,123 hours, the physician declared Viktor Petrov deceased. Cause of death appeared to be cardiac arrest, possibly precipitated by pulmonary embolism. The physician noted this was tragically common on long flights, particularly in middle-aged men. There was nothing anyone could have done. Captain Whitmore made the decision to continue to Moscow rather than divert, Petrov was Canadian diplomatic personnel, his body needed to reach Moscow for proper handling, and Soviet authorities would need to be notified regardless. The aircraft was already over Soviet-aligned airspace. Caroline assisted in moving Petrov's body to a crew rest area in the rear of the aircraft, covering it respectfully with blankets. The physician completed a death report. Margaret documented the incident in the flight log. Susan Palmer comforted upset passengers. Caroline returned to first class, cleaned up Petrov's belongings, placed them in a bag for delivery to Soviet authorities. Her hands remained steady throughout. The aircraft exited Polish airspace at 2110 hours, 13 minutes after Petrov's death. Flight 872 continued toward Moscow, arriving at Sheremetyevo Airport at 0234 hours on November 13th. Soviet medical personnel boarded immediately, removed Petrov's body, and conducted a preliminary examination on site. The British physician provided his assessment. Soviet authorities recorded cause of death as sudden cardiac arrest secondary to suspected pulmonary embolism. The body was released to KGB personnel at 0415 hours. Caroline completed post-flight procedures, submitted required documentation regarding the in-flight death, and returned to the crew hotel at 0530 hours. She shared a taxi with Susan Palmer, who was visibly shaken by the evening's events. Susan mentioned she had never seen anyone die before. Caroline offered quiet reassurance, noted that the physician said nothing could have been done. Susan asked if Caroline was all right. Caroline said yes, just tired. They agreed to get some sleep. Within 12 hours, MI6 London received confirmation through signals intelligence that Soviet authorities had accepted the cardiac arrest conclusion. Petrov's body underwent cursory autopsy. Soviet pathologists found evidence of deep vein thrombosis in his left leg, considered this sufficient explanation for fatal pulmonary embolism. The case was closed within 28 hours. KGB headquarters mourned the loss of a productive asset, began reassigning his network contacts, and notified his wife in Moscow that her husband had died suddenly during travel. His daughter's piano recital occurred without him on November 16th. By November 14th, British and Soviet intelligence services understood an asset had been lost. The investigation was perfunctory. Soviet authorities examined passenger manifests, crew records, and flight documentation. Every lead ended in routine procedures, suggesting nothing beyond tragic medical coincidence. The denials from British intelligence were never issued because no accusations were made. The operation's success lay in its invisibility. British Airways Flight 872 continued its regular London-Moscow schedule. Caroline Mitchell worked 7 more flights to Moscow over the following months. Soviet border guards processed her passport without additional scrutiny. KGB surveillance photographed her during crew layovers, walking to hotels, eating meals, shopping in gum department store with other crew members. Analysis found nothing suspicious. She was exactly what she appeared to be: a flight attendant working her assigned routes. The tactical objective was accomplished. Viktor Petrov's intelligence network collapsed within 4 months. Without his careful management, recruited assets became nervous, communications protocols broke down, and 2 key sources defected to Western intelligence. The Canadian aerospace engineer Petrov had been cultivating refused further contact with his replacement handler. British intelligence gained access to 3 formerly Soviet-controlled sources. MI6's assessment concluded the operation achieved strategic impact far beyond simply eliminating one operative. What was achieved exceeded initial projections. Intelligence gained included detailed information about Soviet technical collection priorities, recruitment methodologies, and communication systems. Secondary benefits emerged when the psychological impact on remaining KGB illegals became apparent. Knowing elimination could occur invisibly during routine travel created operational paranoia. Several Soviet intelligence officers requested reassignment from deep cover positions, citing health concerns that MI6 analysts understood as fear. What it cost was measured differently across agencies. Diplomatic consequences were minimal. No accusations meant no responses required. Relations with Soviet authorities continued their standard Cold War hostility without escalation specific to this incident. Operational costs were more significant. The operation revealed MI6's capacity for invisible action within civilian systems, forcing Soviet intelligence to implement new security protocols for diplomatic travel. Every future operation in this domain would face enhanced scrutiny. For Caroline Mitchell, the consequences took 8 months to manifest fully. She continued working for BOAC exactly as planned, her performance reviews noting nothing unusual. Crew members remembered her as quiet, professional, occasionally attending social events. In June 1964, she submitted standard resignation, citing aging parents requiring care. Her exit interview was unremarkable. BOAC wished her well. She collected her final paycheck and disappeared into a life constructed in Cardiff under a different name. MI6's psychological assessments following her resignation noted severe disassociation symptoms. Caroline had maintained 2 identities for 38 months. The British intelligence operative and the BOAC flight attendant. The operative had killed Viktor Petrov. The flight attendant had served tea to a passenger who later died tragically. Both identities existed within the same person, and neither could fully integrate with the other. Her handlers documented what they termed successful compartmentalization. Her therapist, operating without knowledge of her intelligence work, documented something closer to fractured identity. The calculation MI6's operational command made was that eliminating Petrov and disrupting his network justified the methods employed. Whether this proved correct became clear over the following decade, as British intelligence prevented estimated technological transfers worth millions in research investment. The human cost: 1 KGB illegal dead, 1 MI6 operative psychologically compromised, multiple recruited sources disrupted, was acceptable within Cold War calculus. But the moral question persists beyond operational assessment. Was Viktor Petrov a legitimate military target in undeclared conflict? Or was he a civilian traveling under diplomatic protection who was murdered by state actors? Perspective A argues that intelligence officers operating illegally in foreign nations forfeit normal legal protections, that Petrov's activities directly threatened Western security, and that elimination prevented ongoing damage. The theft of radar specifications he facilitated cost British aerospace firms competitive advantage and potentially compromised defensive capabilities. Perspective B argues that extrajudicial killing aboard civilian aircraft violated international law, that diplomatic immunity exists precisely to prevent state violence, and that the operation set precedent for invisible assassination that eroded trust in civilian transportation systems. Petrov had a family. He was returning home to his daughter's piano recital. The manner of his death, poison administered by someone he trusted to serve him tea, represented the worst aspects of intelligence operations. The answer reveals more about your worldview than about Caroline Mitchell or Viktor Petrov. If you believe state security justifies covert action against foreign intelligence operatives, the operation was successful and necessary. If you believe legal frameworks must constrain state violence even during ideological conflict, the operation was murder disguised as intelligence work. Both positions have factual support. Both ignore elements inconvenient to their narrative. What's your take on the cost of invisible war? Caroline Mitchell spent 3 years building a cover identity, killed a man while serving him tea, then maintained that cover for 8 more months before disappearing into psychiatric care under a false name. Viktor Petrov died believing he was drinking Earl Grey on a routine flight home. His network collapsed. British intelligence gained advantage, and the Cold War continued exactly as before. Except now both sides knew civilian aircraft were battlefields. Drop your perspective in the comments. If this story made you reconsider the human cost of intelligence operations, or understand why deep cover operatives rarely return to normal life, hit that like button and share this with someone who thinks espionage is glamorous. The reality is closer to Caroline Mitchell sitting in a London flat in 1965, unable to explain to her therapist why she sometimes forgets which version of herself is real. Forbidden from telling anyone that the nightmares about serving tea will continue for the rest of her life. While the official record notes only that BOAC flight attendant Caroline Mitchell resigned for family reasons and Soviet intelligence officer Viktor Petrov died of natural causes over Poland. Both statements are true. Neither is complete.